August 7th. The night fell upon the countryside with an unnatural quiet, as though the world itself were holding its breath. I had been journeying for hours through winding roads obscured by thick fog, a pall so dense that even the faint light of my lantern struggled to penetrate it. The trees, gnarled and black against the mist, seemed to reach out like twisted fingers, and each rustle of their leaves carried the whisper of some unseen observer. My horse, a weary creature accustomed to long travels, shivered nervously, snorting into the chill that seemed to seep not only into our bones but into our very spirits. I had chosen this route because it was said to be faster, a shortcut to the next village, yet I could not shake a growing unease. My eyes strained against the gloom, attempting to pierce the veil of fog, when suddenly, through the swirling mist, a shape emerged. A horse-drawn carriage, still as death, standing at the side of the road. Its paint was dark, almost black, glinting faintly under the lantern's glow. The horse drawing it appeared skeletal in the dim light, muscles taut and eyes reflecting nothing but shadows. What froze me most, however, was the absence of a coachman. The reins hung loose in the air as though held by some invisible hand. I halted my horse, heart hammering. "Hello!" I called, voice trembling more than I cared to admit. There was no answer, yet a whisper slithered through the fog, unintelligible at first, then growing clearer, as if beckoning me to step closer. The words were soft, sibilant, almost seductive. I felt an inexplicable pull, a mixture of terror and fascination, urging me to approach. I dismounted, lantern in hand, and as I drew near, the whispering grew into something I could almost comprehend. "Enter, enter and see what lies beyond the veil." Against all reason I stepped forward. The door of the carriage swung open silently, as if expecting me. The interior was darker than the night outside, yet warm in a way that should have been comforting but was anything but. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, a faint metallic tang, like the scent of old blood mixed with decay. My lantern illuminated the interior just enough to reveal a row of seats empty, or so I thought. Shadows shifted, and then I realized they were not shadows at all, but figures, pale and indistinct, seated as though frozen in some eternal journey. Their faces were blurred, features indecipherable, yet I felt their eyes upon me, heavy and accusing. I stepped inside, my limbs betraying me with tremors I could not control. The door shut behind me with a sound like a sigh, sealing the outside world away. The horse outside whinnied once, sharply, then fell silent. I was alone yet surrounded. The whispers, now many and overlapping, seemed to echo from every corner of the carriage, whispering secrets I could not hear, telling stories I could not understand. Time lost meaning. The fog outside the window twisted and writhed, the world beyond becoming unrecognizable. The carriage moved, though I could feel no motion beneath my feet. The landscape, when glimpsed through the misty panes, was not of this world. Trees bent in impossible angles, hills rose and fell like waves, and the moon hung swollen and red in the sky, casting a sickly light. I dared to speak. Who are you?" My voice sounded hollow in the vast interior. The whispering paused, as though considering my question. Then one voice, clearer than the rest, answered. "We are travelers, as you are. Yet you walk between two worlds now." Fear clenched my heart. "Two worlds? I do not understand." "You will," the voice said, soft but insistent, almost kind. "All who enter must understand, or be lost." The carriage slowed, or perhaps it only felt so, and the figures before me shifted, their blurred faces growing more distinct, though never fully. I could sense their sorrow, an endless longing, a despair that seemed to stretch through centuries. One figure raised a hand, faintly, pointing toward the window. I turned and saw a river of silver light, winding through a land that should not exist. The water shimmered, yet it gave off no reflection. Trees leaned toward it, as if drawn by an unseen force, and the ground beneath seemed hollow, suspended between solid and ethereal. A cold dread settled upon me. "Where are we going?" I whispered. "To the end, and beyond," the voice replied. There was no malice, only inevitability. I sank into a seat, feeling the weight of the carriage press upon me as though it were alive. The figures beside me murmured, stories spilling forth in fragments. A mother searching for a child lost to the mist, a soldier who had never returned from battle, a poet who died young, his words unfinished. Each tale seeped into my mind, vivid and painful. I saw their lives as if they were my own, felt their fear, their longing, their despair. I tried to leave, to turn back, but the carriage offered no exit. The door was no longer visible, replaced by the endless interior, stretching beyond reason. The lantern flickered in my hand, shadows dancing wildly across the walls, shaping faces that were not there. My heart pounded in my ears, threatening to overwhelm all thought. I realized with a shock that the carriage was not merely moving through space. It was moving through memory, through time, through the very essence of life and death. Hours, or was it days, passed. I lost track of the sun, of the night, of any measure of time. The whispers never ceased. I could not speak without hearing a chorus of murmurs responding in kind, twisting my words, shaping my thoughts. At one point, I thought I saw my own reflection in the darkened glass, pale and gaunt, eyes hollow. It moved differently than I did, smiling when I did not. I recoiled, stumbling back into the seat, yet it followed me, grinning, whispering. I dared to open my journal, writing feverishly by the weak light of my lantern. The words spilled out almost of their own accord. I do not know if I am awake or dreaming. The figures beside me speak without sound, and yet I hear their lives as though they were mine. I feel the pull of some inevitable destination, and I am powerless to resist. The carriage moves through a world that should not exist, and I fear I am becoming a part of it. The whispers. They know my name, my fears, my sins. I wish to flee, yet every instinct urges me to stay, to listen, to learn. A sudden shift in the air made me shiver violently. The figures stirred, more distinct now, faces no longer blurred but defined in horrifying clarity. I saw pain, terror, regret, and longing etched into their features. One figure, a man with hollow eyes and a skeletal hand, reached toward me, but instead of fear, I felt a strange pity, as though he sought not to harm me but to share a burden I could not yet comprehend. The carriage's interior began to change. The seats twisted into shapes reminiscent of graves, the floor pulsed like a living thing, and the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. I realized I was no longer merely a passenger. I was a participant in a journey that defied all understanding, moving along a road that led not to any village or town, but to the very boundary of life itself. I attempted to speak again. Tell me, what is this place? What have I entered? The voice answered, calm, patient, echoing through the interior. It is a passage, traveler. A path between what is and what will never be. You may leave. But only if you understand. And understanding comes at a price. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, or perhaps it was a shadow, a touch felt but unseen. The figures around me leaned closer, eyes pleading, urging me to see, to accept, to comprehend. I shuddered, overwhelmed by the weight of so many lives, so many stories, all converging upon me in a tide of despair and longing. I dared a glance at the windows once more. The fog outside had thickened into an impenetrable wall, and through it, I saw shapes moving, impossible shapes. Trees bent at right angles, rivers running uphill, lights flickering without source. It was a world suspended between understanding and madness, and I was in its heart, a lone witness to its unending journey. I write this now by lantern light, hoping to preserve some fragment of myself. I do not know if I will survive this night, or if night even exists where we are. I am trapped in a carriage moving endlessly, surrounded by those who cannot leave, and I fear that if I cease to write, I too shall vanish, swallowed by the whispers and the fog, by the eternal journey that knows no end. Perhaps this is punishment, or perhaps it is revelation. Cannot tell. All I know is the presence beside me, the weight of countless lives pressing in, the inevitability of the road ahead. I hear my name again, whispered softly, insistently. Stay, understand, or be lost. And I fear that understanding may be the very thing that destroys me. August 8th. The night, I am no longer certain of its measure, stretches on, unbroken and relentless. The carriage moves onward, a phantom upon an impossible road. I can no longer tell if I am alone or surrounded, for the figures beside me are no longer static, no longer merely passengers. They stir with purpose now, though their movements are deliberate and slow, as though time itself bends to the rhythm of their existence. Their eyes, hollow and unyielding, follow my every motion, and I feel as though each glance strips away some part of my being. I dared to speak again, though my throat is raw from the effort. Why am I here? What do you want from me? The whispers answered not in words, but in sensation, a pressure in my chest, a cold that crept through my bones, an unbearable longing to surrender, to become a part of the endless journey. I shook, and the carriage responded. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if alive. The lantern flickered, and in its brief darkness, I saw forms moving beyond the confines of the seats, figures standing in the aisles, pale faces contorted in expressions I cannot name. One figure approached me, gliding silently over the floor as though unbound by gravity. She was young, impossibly so. Her face a portrait of sorrow and innocence intertwined. Her eyes met mine, and I felt a weight descend upon my heart, a sense of inevitable understanding. She spoke, her voice a whisper carried on the air rather than uttered aloud. Do you see now? We are bound here as you are. Each who enters becomes part of the journey. To leave is to accept the passage, or to be lost. I shook my head, my mind struggling to comprehend. Lost. How can I be lost if I am still here? I am still, alive, am I not? Her gaze did not falter. Alive, perhaps. Yet this place is not of life, nor is it of death. It is the space between, the path all must travel yet few perceive. You walk among those who have lingered too long, whose lives are suspended in the fog, carried eternally along a road without end. I felt the enormity of her words as a physical weight. My limbs ached, though I had moved little, and a chill that had nothing to do with the air gnawed at my flesh. I could sense the others around me stirring in response, their whispers growing louder, overlapping, a chorus of lives suspended in perpetual torment. Each fragment of their existence pressed into my consciousness, demanding recognition, demanding understanding. I dared to look at one of the passengers more closely. He was a man older than I, with a face lined in sorrow. His eyes were fixed upon some unseen horizon, and when he spoke, it was directly into my mind rather than my ears. Do you not see? Each journey carries its weight. Each traveler bears the stories of those who came before, and each step forward binds the soul tighter to the road. To resist is folly. To accept is only the beginning. I shivered. And what is the end? I whispered, barely audibly. The carriage answered with silence. Or perhaps it was not silence, but a deeper presence, the sense of inevitability pressing upon me. I turned my gaze to the window, hoping for a glimpse of the familiar countryside, of some landmark that might anchor me to the world I knew, but the fog had thickened into a wall impenetrable by sight. Beyond it, shapes moved, impossible and fluid, trees bending as though in agony, rivers reversing their course, lights flickering with no source. The landscape itself seemed to mock reason, as if the world had dissolved into the fevered imaginings of a mind untethered. I sank into the seat, exhausted by the effort of resisting the pull. My hand trembled as I held the lantern, and in its quivering light, I glimpsed reflections that were not mine. Faces flickered upon the polished wood of the carriage interior, faces of strangers, friends, enemies, all blending into a tapestry of existence that defied comprehension. I recoiled, feeling my sanity fray with each passing moment. The whispers surged, and I realized that they were not simply voices, but memories, lives compressed into sound and sensation, pressing into my mind until I felt I would collapse beneath their weight. And then, a figure stepped forward. A man, tall and shadowed, features obscured, yet radiating authority. His presence silenced the others, the whispers faltering into nothing. He regarded me with eyes that were at once infinite and absent, as though he could see both the world I had left behind and the one I now traversed. "Traveler," he said, voice resonating in the hollow space between thought and sound, "you stand at the threshold. You may yet choose your path. To understand is to accept, but acceptance is no gift. It is a burden, heavy as all lives carried upon this road." I felt a shiver that was not of cold pass through me. "And if I refuse?" I asked, my voice barely more than a breath. He inclined his head. "Then you will remain, wandering the spaces between, your soul neither bound nor free, a passenger for eternity. Many have refused. Few are remembered." I swallowed, trembling. The weight of choice pressed upon me as never before. I thought of home, of warmth, of the sun upon familiar fields. Yet even as I longed to return, a strange curiosity gnawed at me, a need to see, to understand, to witness what lay beyond comprehension. Perhaps, I thought, understanding was the only escape from fear. I nodded slowly, and the man's presence shifted, receding into the shadows. The whispers returned, softer now, yet more insistent, weaving stories into my mind. I saw their lives in fragments. A child lost to illness, a lover who waited in vain, a wanderer struck by misfortune. Each tale was vivid, raw, a mirror reflecting my own fears and regrets. I realized with dawning horror that to understand them was to bear them, to carry their pain as though it were my own. Hours passed, though time no longer had meaning, and the carriage continued its relentless journey. I spoke little, consumed by the torrent of lives and stories pressing upon me. The figures beside me leaned closer, guiding me, sharing fragments, demanding attention. I began to write feverishly in my journal, recording every detail, every whisper, in the desperate hope that words might anchor me to some measure of reality. August 9th. The carriage slowed, though I could feel no change in motion. The landscape outside the window became more defined, yet no less impossible. Hills rose and fell like waves, rivers shimmered with light yet reflected nothing, and the fog twisted into shapes that seemed almost human, almost aware. I felt the presence of those outside, watching, waiting, yet unable, or unwilling to intervene. A figure, small and ethereal, approached me. She held a hand out, fragile, translucent, and I felt an urge to take it, to trust in her guidance. "You have seen much," she whispered, though the sound was inside my mind. "You understand what others cannot. But the journey is not yet complete. To leave, you must confront what lies within yourself, the fears you hide even from your own heart." I shuddered, realizing she spoke truth. The carriage, the passengers, the endless fog, they were all mirrors, reflecting not only the lives of those trapped here, but the hidden corners of my own mind. I felt shame, regret, anger, sorrow, all magnified by the weight of countless others. To flee would be to deny them, to accept their suffering without acknowledgement. Yet to stay, to fully understand, threatened to consume me entirely. I closed my eyes, bracing for what I must confront. Images surged unbidden, faces from my past, mistakes I had buried, fears I had ignored. They swirled about me, voices rising in a cacophony that threatened to shatter my reason, and yet, in the midst of chaos, a single thought emerged, steady and unwavering. To endure is to bear witness, and to bear witness is to honor the journey. I opened my eyes. The carriage was still, the passengers watching, waiting for my choice. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of their expectation pressing upon me. I spoke, voice trembling yet firm. I will understand. I will see this journey through, not for my sake, but for all of you. A silence fell, profound and absolute. Then, one by one, the figures nodded, expressions softening, features relaxing. The whispers faded into gentle murmurs, no longer overwhelming but guiding. The carriage moved forward once more, yet now, its motion felt purposeful, deliberate, a path unfolding rather than a trap. I do not know how long we traveled. Days. Weeks. Time no longer matters. What matters is the knowledge I have gained, the lives I have glimpsed, the truths I have been forced to confront. The carriage carries us onward, yes, but no longer aimlessly. We are bound, yet there is purpose, a rhythm to the journey that was hidden in the beginning, now revealed through understanding and acceptance. August 12th. I write this not as a record of fear, but as a testament. The road stretches endlessly, yet I feel no despair. The passengers beside me are no longer mere shadows. They are companions, each carrying their own stories, each sharing their burdens and their joys. We move together, a tapestry of lives intertwined, a journey not of suffering alone, but of revelation. I have come to see that the carriage is not a prison, but a passage. To enter is to confront the unknown, to witness the stories that the living often overlook. It is a place of reflection, of reckoning, of understanding. And though I long for the sun upon familiar fields, for the warmth of home, I know that my place is here, at least for now, learning, listening, bearing witness. The fog still surrounds us, thick and unyielding, but it no longer terrifies me. Within its embrace lies truth, and within truth lies the path forward. I write these words with hope, and with reverence for the journey that continues without end. I do not know if I will ever leave the carriage, or if I am destined to travel forever. But I do know this. Fear is no longer my master. I have seen the faces of those who cannot leave, heard their whispers, felt their burdens, and through it all I endure. And in enduring I will. The journey continues, and I am a part of it. Story number 2. It is with a trembling hand that I commit these words to paper, not for my own comfort, for I have little of that left, but for the hope that someone somewhere may read them and perhaps turn back before they find themselves upon the road I traveled tonight. I was bound for the coastal town of Dunwich, having set out from Ravensport just before dusk. My lodging was arranged in advance, and I had been assured the road, though rarely used, would be quiet and safe. The weather, however, had other plans. The fog rose from the marshlands like a living thing, crawling over the fields and swallowing the hedgerows. It clung to my coat and crept into my lungs, and soon I could see no further than a dozen paces ahead. I walked on, the sound of my boots muffled by the damp earth, my only company the occasional drip of moisture falling from the branches overhead. My lantern, though freshly filled with oil, gave off a sickly halo that seemed to illuminate nothing at all, the mist bending and distorting the light into pale, shifting shadows. I had begun to feel the unease that comes from prolonged isolation, that peculiar tension when one is not entirely certain they are alone. I could not say why, but every so often I felt the hairs upon my neck stand to attention, as though unseen eyes were following my progress. It was then I heard it, the faint rhythmic clatter of wheels upon the road ahead. At first, I thought it might be an echo of my own steps distorted by the fog, but it grew louder, accompanied by the dull thud of hooves. A carriage was approaching. I stepped to the side of the road and waited, the fog parting slightly as dark shapes loomed through it. A black, four-wheeled coach emerged from the white gloom, drawn by two great horses whose manes and tails dripped with moisture. The vehicle was of an old style, its lacquered sides reflecting my lantern in warped glints. I raised my hand in greeting, expecting to see the face of the coachman, but the seat was empty. No reins guided the horses. They moved with the steady precision of creatures under an unseen command, their eyes fixed straight ahead. My instinct was to turn away and continue on foot, yet some strange compulsion rooted me to the spot. The coach halted before me, the door swinging open without a sound. It was then that I heard the whispers. They came not from the horses, nor from the mist around us, but from the open darkness within the carriage. Dozens of soft voices overlapped, speaking words I could not quite understand. They beckoned, not with urgency, but with a certain inevitability, as though they knew I would obey. I cannot explain why I stepped forward. Perhaps it was the cold, gnawing at my bones, or the growing certainty that to remain alone on that road was somehow more dangerous than whatever lay within. The step creaked beneath my boot, and I entered. The door shut with a decisive click, the lantern light from outside snuffed away. The air within was heavy, stale, and faintly perfumed with something sweet yet rotten, like flowers left too long in water. My hand groped along the seat until I found the worn leather upholstery. The whispers continued, though now they seemed to be inside my head rather than in my ears. The carriage lurched forward, and I realized with a start that I could no longer hear the horses. The sound of wheels upon the road had changed, softer, as though we rolled not on earth or cobblestone, but on something yielding. I lifted the curtain from the window, but there was no sign of the fog-bound countryside. Instead, I saw an endless expanse of grey nothingness, neither sky nor ground, only a shifting void through which the coach glided. It was then that I became aware of my fellow passengers. There were 4 of them seated opposite me, their features pale and indistinct in the dimness. The first was an elderly woman in a faded bonnet, her gloved hands folded in her lap, though her fingers twitched ceaselessly. Beside her sat a young man in a soldier's coat, the fabric torn and stained, his eyes staring straight ahead without a blink. Next to him was a child, perhaps 10 years of age, her face half hidden behind a curtain of dark hair. At the far end sat a gaunt gentleman in formal attire. His skin stretched tight over his cheekbones, lips drawn into a thin, bloodless line. None of them moved to acknowledge me, yet I felt their attention upon me like a weight. The whispers grew louder, threading through my thoughts until I could almost discern the words, phrases like "not yet," and "he comes among us," and "the road has no end." I tried to speak, to ask where we were going, but my voice emerged as little more than a croak. The gaunt gentleman turned his head then, his eyes catching some unseen light, and I saw they were not eyes at all but deep hollows in which a faint glimmer burned. "You are between," he said, his voice low but clear. "Neither living nor dead, not yet claimed by either shore." I recoiled, pressing my back into the seat. "This is not possible," I muttered, though my words rang hollow. The soldier shifted, his gaze flicking to me for the briefest instant. I saw then that the dark stains on his coat were not merely old dirt but something far darker, dried and cracked. The child tilted her head, and in the dim light I caught the glint of tears running down her cheeks, though her expression did not change. The old woman's hands ceased their twitching, and she spoke in a voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "We ride until the last bell tolls. Then one may leave, if the door will open." I turned to the window again, searching for any sign of escape, but the void beyond seemed to shift and writhe as though it were alive. Shapes formed within it, faces, perhaps, or the suggestion of hands reaching out. I could not be certain. Time lost meaning. The carriage neither slowed nor turned, the motion a constant, hypnotic rhythm. My mind wandered to memories of my life, childhood days in the sunlit fields near my home, the laughter of friends now long gone, the warmth of a hearth on winter nights. These recollections felt fragile, slipping from me like water through cupped hands. I began to fear that if I could not hold on to them, I would forget entirely who I was. At some point, I know not how long after, the whispers hushed and a deep tolling echoed through the carriage. It was a bell, distant yet resonant, each peal sending a shiver through my bones. The passengers stirred. The gaunt man reached for the door, his skeletal fingers curling around the handle, but it would not budge. He made no sound of frustration, only withdrew his hand and resumed his rigid posture. The soldier tried next, then the old woman, then the child. None succeeded. At last, all eyes, those that still had them, turned to me. My heart pounded. I reached out, the cold metal chilling my skin, and pulled. The door swung open with a suddenness that nearly threw me from my seat. Beyond lay not the void but the fog-shrouded road where I had first seen the coach. The horses stood waiting, steam rising from their flanks, their heads turned toward me. I hesitated, glancing back at the others. The child raised one hand, as though in farewell, though her expression remained unreadable. "Go," the old woman whispered. "But remember, the road bends back." I stepped down onto the wet earth, the door closing behind me with a soft thud. When I turned, the carriage was gone. Only the fog remained, curling around me like cold breath. I made my way to Dunwich before dawn, though the journey seemed shorter than it should have been. I spoke of the coach to no one, yet even now, as I write these words by lamplight, I can hear the faint clatter of wheels in the distance, and I wonder if the road will one night lead me to that door again. Story number 3. Under the dim glow of the oil lamps that flickered faintly along the corridors of Weatherby Hall, I first set eyes upon the object that would so thoroughly unmake my friend. It was in the grand study, where the scent of polished mahogany mingled with the faint, persistent odor of smoke from the crackling fire. The walls were hung with gilt-framed portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their painted eyes glazed with centuries of dust, but all those other visages seemed to fade from memory the moment my gaze fell upon her, the noblewoman in the painting that now hung above the mantel. I had not been present when Marcus Harcourt, my oldest and dearest friend, acquired her, but I had heard from others that she had arrived from a remote estate in northern France, brought over by a dealer of some repute. The seller's name was whispered rather than spoken, and no one could tell precisely how the portrait had passed into the hands of the dealer in the first place. The painting was remarkable not merely for its detail but for the eyes, deep, almost black irises glinting with a moistness no brush should achieve, as though they harbored some living depth. The noblewoman's expression was composed, lips poised in the faintest of smiles, yet her gaze seemed almost to part the veil between canvas and observer. It followed me when I moved across the room, a gentle yet undeniable tracking, as though her attention was pinned to me and me alone. Marcus laughed when I mentioned it, brushing it aside as the skill of a master painter, but there was an odd twitch in his smile, a flicker of something that unsettled me. Over the weeks that followed, I began to notice a change in Marcus. It was not sudden, but gradual, like the creeping shadow of dusk overtaking a field. His letters to me became briefer, more erratic in tone. When I visited Weatherby Hall, I found him in the study at all hours, sitting before the painting, speaking to it in a voice so low I could never catch the words. He dismissed his servants one by one, saying they were clumsy or insolent, until only a single housemaid remained. And even she confided in me, in a whisper near the kitchen, that she heard footsteps at night in rooms Marcus had locked, and the sound of a woman's sigh carried faintly down the corridor. I began to keep a journal of my visits, perhaps out of instinct, perhaps because the air in that place had grown so heavy that I feared I might lose track of the truth if I relied solely on memory. In those entries I recorded each peculiar shift, the way Marcus seemed thinner, paler, his eyes ringed in a faint shadow, the way the air in the study seemed colder than the rest of the house, no matter how the fire roared. Most disturbing of all was the way the noblewoman's painted gaze began to appear elsewhere. One evening, while taking supper with Marcus, I caught my reflection in the glass of the dining room window, and behind me, over my shoulder, was her face, her eyes fixed on mine, though the painting was 2 rooms away. I gasped and turned, knocking my glass to the floor. But Marcus only smiled faintly and asked if I was feeling quite well. From then on, I avoided mirrors in Weatherby Hall, but even without them, she found ways to intrude. Passing along the west corridor one night, I saw a shadow cast against the wall, a silhouette of a woman in a gown with wide skirts and an elaborate coiffure, though there was no one in the hallway with me. The housemaid left soon after, her courage failing, and Marcus did not replace her. By the onset of autumn, he had ceased replying to my letters altogether, so I resolved to visit unannounced. I arrived on a rain-swept evening, the air thick with the scent of wet leaves, and found the great doors unlatched. Inside, the hall was dim and empty, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of timber. I found Marcus in the study, seated before the painting, his face gaunt and his hands clasped tightly together. He seemed startled to see me, but only for a moment. Then he smiled, though his eyes looked past me toward the canvas. His voice was hoarse when he told me he had been communing with her, that she had shown him things beyond imagining, worlds between the living and the dead. His words chilled me, for there was no jest in them. That night, I stayed in one of the guest chambers, determined to speak sense to him in the morning. Sleep eluded me, however, for I awoke in the small hours to the feeling of being watched. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting pale silver across the room, and there, reflected in the tall mirror opposite my bed, stood the noblewoman, her black eyes glistening, her lips moving soundlessly. When I turned to look directly, there was nothing, but in the mirror she remained, stepping closer, the fabric of her gown whispering like dry leaves. My breath seized in my chest, and I covered the mirror with the bedsheet, trembling until dawn. I left at first light, but Marcus would not come with me. His final words to me as I departed were that I could not understand, that I had not seen her as he had, nor felt her presence as he did. I did not see him again for several months, and when I did return to Wetherby Hall, it was under the somber pall of a solicitor's letter. Marcus had been found dead in the study, seated in the same chair, his eyes open and fixed upon the painting. The coroner spoke of heart failure, but I could not bring myself to believe it. The strange part was that the painting was gone. The great space above the mantel was bare, the dust-marked outline of its frame the only sign it had ever been there. None of the staff, few as they were, knew where it had gone. Some claimed a man had come for it late in the night, but none could say who he was or from where he came. Even now, years later, I sometimes see her. Not often, but enough to doubt the comfort of my own home. I will catch her eyes in the reflection of a shop window, or in the glass of a picture frame, lingering just long enough for me to feel that creeping dread settle into my bones. I keep no mirrors in my rooms, and yet I know she will find me when she wishes, for Marcus once wrote in one of his final letters, now burned, that she was not bound to the canvas alone. She had chosen him, as perhaps she has now chosen me. Story number 4. It was on the 12th evening of my stay in Bracton that I first saw the fog rise in such a manner as to blot the very bones of the town from my sight. Bracton itself lay crouched along the bend of the river, a place of narrow streets and roofs pitched like the hoods of penitents. I had arrived under the pretext of researching certain genealogical matters at the local records office, though, truth be told, it was the peculiar reputation of the place that drew me. The folk here spoke little to strangers, and even when they did, it was in a manner as though I remained fixed upon some unspoken thing beyond the conversation. That evening, I had wandered further than I intended. The gas lamps burned in their glass cages, halos of pale yellow swimming in the thickening fog. I found myself upon a lane I had not seen before, its stones slick beneath my boots and the walls leaning so close above me that I felt as though the street itself might close over. There was a silence to that quarter, save for the soft hiss of the fog brushing brick and glass. It was in this silence that I saw it. A great stone building, its windows black as a drowned man's eyes, yet with a certain gravitas that made me halt at once. The sign above the door bore a single word in gilt letters now tarnished with age. Athenaeum. A library then. Yet there was something queer in the way the steps down to its door seemed damp, though no water pooled upon them. I placed my hand upon the rail. It was slick and cold, not as metal should be in such air, but as though it had been drawn from the depths of a river. A faint ripple of unease passed through me, though curiosity, as it always has, overrode caution. The door yielded to my touch without sound, swinging inward to reveal a vast hall lit by lamps whose flames stood tall and unshaken, though I felt at once that the air within was unnaturally still. What struck me first was the floor. It lay beneath a surface that shimmered like water in moonlight, yet when I stepped forward, my boots met no resistance. I knelt, touched it, it was not wet. Indeed, it was dry as parchment, though my eyes insisted I was gazing upon water. Beneath that strange mirage I thought I saw shapes, dark shapes unmoving far below. The shelves rose in tiers, wrought of oak so dark it drank the light. The volumes they bore were massive, bound in leathers of deep hues, some cracked with age, others seeming almost to pulse with a slow, inward life. I approached the nearest, meaning only to examine the spine, when a whisper reached my ear. It was not the rustle of the building settling, nor the sigh of air through a crack. No, it was speech soft as breath against skin. I could not discern the words, for they came in a tongue unknown to me, yet the cadence was such that I knew it was reading. The pages turned without the aid of hand or breeze. My heart quickened. I drew closer, and as I leaned toward the open book, the letters upon the page shifted, writhing, arranging themselves into symbols I did not know. I blinked, and for a moment they seemed almost to form words in English, but each time I thought I grasped the meaning, it slipped from my mind like water through fingers. I felt a faint pressure in my head, as though my very thoughts were being pressed into some new shape. I wandered deeper between the stacks, and the whispers grew more insistent, overlapping, yet never rising above that conspiratorial hush. At times I fancied they spoke to me, urging me to listen, to understand. A clock somewhere chimed the hour, though the sound seemed distant, muffled, as though underwater. When I turned a corner I saw him, or rather I saw the outline of a man seated at a desk. His features were obscured by shadow, though a lamp burned upon the table before him. He did not move, not even when I approached and cleared my throat. "Good evening," I ventured, but the sound of my voice fell flat, swallowed by the heavy air. The man's head tilted slightly, and I saw his hands, pale, long-fingered, resting upon an open ledger. The pages were black, utterly black, yet as I stared, faint lines of silver etched themselves upon the surface, vanishing before I could make sense of them. I stepped closer, and at that, he raised his head. I cannot say what I saw in that face, for even now the memory comes to me as though through warped glass, features that shifted subtly, refusing to fix themselves into any one countenance. I only know that his eyes were dark as the water that lay upon the floor, and that something in them suggested a depth without bottom. "You hear them," he said at last, in a voice low and steady. "The books?" "Yes." He inclined his head once. "They speak to all who enter. Not all understand. Fewer still remain." Something in the way he said remained set a coldness through me. "What is this place?" "Yes." "A place of keeping," he replied. "Of memory. Of mind." His gaze did not waver from mine. "And mind is the price." I thought then of the strange pressure behind my eyes, the way my own recollections seemed to blur and reform since entering. I had been in Bracton for 12 days, had I? Or had it been longer? My thoughts slipped, as though I were treading upon unseen currents. I stepped back, my heel striking the shimmering floor, and for an instant the illusion broke. I saw, beneath a thin skin of impossibly clear water, shapes moving, slow, languid, like figures drifting in the depths. Their faces, pale and upturned, mouths slightly open as though mid-breath, were fixed in expressions of longing. One of them, I swear, had my eyes. I stumbled away, and the figure at the desk did not follow. Instead, the shelves themselves seemed to close in, the rows narrowing. Books jostled and shifted upon them, spines turning to face me, their whispering now urgent, almost imploring. I felt my will bending, my desire to leave clashing with a strange, swelling need to stay, to understand. I reached the door at last, though I could not recall the path I took. My hand closed upon the cold metal of the latch, and I hesitated. Behind me the whispers softened, coaxing, promising. I thought of the black pages, the silver writing, the endless depth. The fog outside was thicker now, the street beyond swallowed in its embrace. I stepped into it, and the door closed soundlessly behind me. Only when I reached the main thoroughfare did I realize I carried a book, small, bound in dark leather, its surface warm to the touch. I had no memory of taking it. When I opened it later in my lodging, the pages were blank, but as the night wore on, words began to appear, faint at first, then bolder, in a script I could not read. I have not returned to the Athenaeum, though at times I think I see it, down some forgotten lane, the door just ajar. Yet each night, the book whispers from my bedside, and each morning, I find I recall less of the world beyond its pages. I fear it is not the library that is submerged in water, but I who am drowning, and that soon I shall be among the shapes beneath its floor, waiting for the next curious soul to wander in from the fog.